In this talk, I'm going to demonstrate how political hashtags affect the quality of democratic discourse based on a large-scale controlled online experiment. Hashtags related to social issues that amplify the visibility of trending social topics on social media, or political hashtags, are an inseparable part of online discourse around current events. In fact, designers and engineers have turned to political hashtags to increase participation in online discussion around social issues, typically by building systems that classify, rank, and attach the top most popular hashtags to articles based on the frequency of hashtags that appear in social media conversations. In a similar vein, journalists are also using political hashtags, as shown here, to increase readership and to contextualize reporting, especially on social topics. And this practice is particularly salient on social media, where news companies incorporate hashtags in the headlines or in the text part of the social media article in these short, digestible previews. And for this tactic to be effective, it's common for news writers to capitalize on political hashtags that are known to have gone viral and thus have broad resonance with the current and potential readership. According to Columbia Journalism Review, such practice is perceived as a good way to introduce a story or perspective into the mainstream news cycle and a way to figure out what the public wants to discuss and learn more about. Scholars, too, for the most part, have generally taken a positive view of how political hashtags shape online discourse, emphasizing that political hashtags inform debate, challenge public perceptions around contested topics, and enable personal storytelling across discursive networks. So, engineers are using them, journalists and news companies are using them, and researchers, for the most part, think political hashtags have a positive influence on online public discourse. Then, why are we extremely divided across issues embodied by political hashtags? For example, 1 year after the Me Too movement, reports now show that people's opinions have shifted more negatively against Me Too survivors. And according to polls, people are more divided on social issues surrounding sexual harassment, with the divide running primarily along partisan lines. Likewise, the majority of Americans now have an unfavorable view of the Black Lives Matter. So again, why are viewpoints and discussions becoming increasingly polarized around important social issues embodied by political hashtags? To find out, we conducted a controlled online experiment. Using Qualtrics, we designed an experimental survey in which we randomly show each participant a news post either containing or excluding political hashtags in the headline and the text portion of the news post. The hashtag condition on the left, as you can see here, was actually the version published by the NPR Facebook page. And for the control condition on the right, we excluded the hashtag in the post text, as well as the phrase "Me Too" prompts in the headline. And for the experiment, we used 4 news posts topically focused on Me Too and 4 on Black Lives Matter, giving us a total of 8 news articles originally published on the New York Times and NPR Facebook pages. And selection of articles was primarily based on whether the intended message of the article could be best preserved with minimal modification of the headline and the news post text, regardless of whether there was a hashtag or not. So for each news post, there was a control and a hashtag version as shown here. However, we wanted to take this a step further and add a second experimental factor to reflect the reality of social media news articles that often contain affective comments. So we decided to add positive and negative comments as a second factor, giving us a 2x3 factorial design. This resulted in a total of 48 news posts, one of which was randomly displayed in the survey system to the participant who answered questions and left a comment in reaction to the one news post they saw in the survey. And through this experiment, we wanted to understand how political hashtags affect the quality of online discourse by addressing the following research questions. First, how does the presence of political hashtags in news posts influence the topical content discussed by the commenters, the emotional tone of commenters, and finally, the rhetorical style of discourse across commenters? To understand the differences in topical content between the comments on news posts with and without political hashtags, we used point-wise mutual information to identify topically important keywords. Commonly used in statistical analysis of textual data, PMI allows us to identify words that co-occur together more often than random, thereby providing insight into the topical content that characterizes the corpus of texts. To ensure consistency of findings, we cross-checked our PMI results with n-gram analyses. Second, to understand whether the presence of political hashtags influences the emotional tone of comments, we calculated the sentiment of the comments using sentiment R, while controlling for valence shifters such as negators, amplifiers, deamplifiers, and so on. After obtaining the sentiment scores for each comment, we then ran regression analyses with the scores for both positive and negative sentiments as dependent variables. However, we only report on the effect of hashtags for negative sentiments, specifically on anger, fear, and disgust, as regression results were significant only for these three negative sentiments. We also included gender, political view, and comment valence as control variables in our models to eliminate potential confounding effects. And finally, to compare how political hashtags influence rhetorical style, we conducted discourse analysis on all comments across all experimental conditions and articles written by those who identified as politically moderate. For this analysis, we first approached our primary data through a grounded inductive coding process and used memoing and mapping techniques to identify and organize high-level themes and patterns in rhetorical style. We then used axial coding to understand how rhetorical patterns related to key themes. And finally, we performed discourse analysis to analyze the language of comments that served as evidence for the influence of political hashtags on people's rhetorical style. Going forth, in the interest of time, I'm going to show you some selected findings from our paper. First, we found that when hashtags were included, people used more language predominantly focused on the hashtag itself, drowning out any references to the main subject matter of the news post. For example, what I'm showing you here are the keywords listed in the descending order of PMI, or point-wise mutual information scores, which we use as a proxy to measure topical focus. And what you're seeing here is that when Black Lives Matter hashtags are included in news posts, participants tend to use language in their comments that is clearly focused on the hashtag itself. By contrast, those in the control group who saw the exact same articles, again, identical articles, but without the Black Lives Matter hashtag, use language that are topically focused on the actual subject matter of the news post. Second, when hashtags were included in news posts, participants used significantly more words associated with anger, fear, and disgust. And finally, one of the prominent differences in rhetorical style between the hashtag and the control group participants was the use of first-person pronouns in how participants grounded their arguments. For example, this is a Facebook news post that originally included the Black Lives Matter hashtag. And here's the one where we removed it. And when the hashtag was removed, participants often prefaced their arguments in first person. And these comments that I'm about to show you are redacted for the purpose of this presentation. I think kids these days should be. I think that the main problem. I think it makes some good points. I'm a firm believer that. I think that discussing. And to us as researchers, this is really interesting rhetorical behavior because in political communication, the use of first-person perspective in dialogue is really important because it rhetorically anchors the discourse to the present moment, signals reflection of personal values to the reasoning behind one's words, and is an indication of cognitive processing as well as sense of authenticity, which are factors known to contribute to constructive social discussion behavior. Contrast this with why don't all lives matter? Black lives absolutely matter. Black lives matter is a crucial topic. Black lives matter, so do white lives, Asian lives, and Hispanic lives. And as you can see here, there is no first-person language in the comments from the hashtag group. And the language in these comments is clearly less reflective, less personal, and less open to difference. Instead, the majority of comments are strong declarative statements that do not leave room for multiple opinions or experiences. For example, this same commenter also argues that race should not continue to be an issue in this country. Such black and white rhetoric shown in this example effectively serves to eliminate gradations in perspectives, thereby narrowing the scope of discussion to an either-or logic. In another example, another politically moderate commenter from the hashtag group argues that education is straightforward. You either excel or you don't. Here, the commenter kind of distills the complexity of the topic to a choice between two alternatives, which makes it easier to criticize, or in this case, sarcastically victimize those who may potentially disagree with her, as expressed in the phrase, "Oh, the poor Black people." So why do these findings all matter? These findings matter because the common social media practice of using something as simple as a political hashtag can drastically impact the quality of modern-day democratic discourse on the internet. And our study shows that when news posts contain political hashtags, there is a strong lexical focus on hashtags and discourse behavior, which in return minimizes room for open and reasoned discussions. For example, when hashtags are present in news posts, people tend to use language focused narrowly around the hashtags as shown in the PMI results. And when people are focused on the hashtag itself, they don't engage with the facts or the salient topics of the article. And furthermore, such hashtag parlance are often sweeping statements that call upon reductionistic black and white framings of a social issue and employ inflammatory and critical statements as shown in our discourse analysis. By contrast, commenters shown news posts without the hashtags were more reasoned, nuanced, and inclusive of different perspectives as demonstrated in their rhetorical style of arguments. People engaged with the actual content of the article by expressing their ideas with personal reflection and values framed in the first-person perspective. And in doing so, participants often brought up topics and ideas relevant to the social content of the article, thereby expanding the scope of commentary and setting the stage for a richer quality of discussion. Another point we'd like to make is related to heuristic processing, or making quick information judgments, which is particularly salient to the consumption of news and political content on social media. When people process online political information through heuristic shortcuts, negative words induce more negative conclusions on the discussion topic. And in our experiment, we show that political hashtags and news posts lexically engender more anger, fear, and disgust sentiments in people's comments. This implies that long trails of emotionally negative commentary around hashtagged news can amplify negativity bias towards the conversation topic in comment threads. And such commenting behavior can disproportionately inflate the focus of discussion on negative perspectives surrounding a given issue. And what all these findings demonstrate is that, in the long run, political hashtags may impede critical conversations around social topics, especially around social media news articles, which are and will continue to be important public spheres of discourse. That said, I want to end this presentation by stating that if we want to build and sustain healthy discussions online, one that bridge rather than sharpen differences in social perspectives, then we really need to examine how social media norms and practices that are often taken for granted influence the democratic health of the internet.